Vanessa sat beneath the county seal and told the judge our father could no longer recognize his own daughters. "He doesn't understand why we're here," she said, pressing one hand to her chest. "He needs me to manage the farm before he hurts himself." 3 weeks earlier, Dad had forgotten my name 30 minutes after taking the vitamins Vanessa prepared for him. But at an independent clinic, doctors removed every unverified pill from his routine. Within 72 hours, his memory returned. We told Vanessa nothing. She kept describing him as confused and helpless while asking the court for control of his land, accounts, and medical decisions. Then the hearing room door opened. Dad walked in wearing the faded green farm jacket Vanessa claimed he could no longer button. He looked directly at her and said, "I remember why you need me declared incompetent." Then he placed a sealed feed store envelope on the judge's desk. "My name is Laurel Keene. I'm 36 years old and I live in Ames, Iowa." Dad's farm sat 12 miles north of Ames, Iowa, on land our family had worked for 3 generations. I was helping him prepare a 5-year lease for a young farming couple. His only condition was simple: the land stayed productive and together. Vanessa hated that plan. She kept saying Dad was too old to understand what the property was worth. Vanessa was 4 years older than me and had moved back into the farmhouse after Dad's knee surgery. She reminded everyone that she had stayed while I built my career as an agricultural insurance specialist in the city. I carried guilt about that. So when she said Dad needed help organizing his medication, meals, and appointments, I believed she was finally doing something generous. The first time Dad forgot my name, Vanessa had handed him 3 pale capsules from a plastic cup. She called them memory vitamins recommended by a wellness consultant. 30 minutes later, Dad stared at me across the kitchen table and asked why the insurance woman was reading his lease. Vanessa touched my shoulder and whispered, "You see what I deal with every day?" Dad seemed confused whenever I visited in the afternoon, but our early morning phone calls were different. Before breakfast, he remembered crop prices, fence repairs, even the exact rent offered by the young couple. After Vanessa gave him the capsules, his words became slower. When I mentioned the pattern, she accused me of criticizing her after leaving all the difficult work to her. A week later, Vanessa placed a glossy brochure beside Dad's coffee. A development company wanted the southern 80 acres for a distribution center. The offer was nearly 3 times the land's agricultural value. Dad pushed the brochure away and said, "That field isn't for concrete." Vanessa laughed softly and told me he had already forgotten agreeing to consider it. Dad kept every farm decision inside a black ledger stored above the refrigerator. Contracts, seed bills, equipment repairs. Nothing happened without an entry. That afternoon, the ledger was gone. Vanessa claimed Dad had misplaced it during one of his episodes. But when I checked the shelf, the dust showed a clean rectangle, and beside it lay one broken capsule with beige powder leaking out. 2 days later, a process server arrived at my office. Vanessa had filed for emergency guardianship and financial control over Dad. Her petition described him as disoriented, impulsive, and vulnerable to manipulation. I was the manipulation she meant. A temporary hearing was scheduled in 18 days. If Vanessa won, she could manage his accounts, medical care, and every decision involving the farm. I drove to the farmhouse that evening. Dad was sitting on the back steps without his coat, though the air was cold. For one clear minute he recognized me. He gripped my wrist and said, "Don't let her speak for me." Then Vanessa opened the kitchen door holding his plastic cup. Dad released me immediately. By the time she reached us, he was calling me by my mother's name. Vanessa refused to let Dad see another doctor. She said changing providers would confuse him and damage his routine. That answer settled something in me. I contacted an independent geriatric clinic in Des Moines and explained the rapid changes surrounding the capsules. The nurse would not speculate, but she said sudden, time-linked confusion required a full medication review, not another supplement recommendation. Before leaving, I went into the mudroom for Dad's faded green farm jacket. Vanessa had hidden it behind 2 winter coats. Inside the chest pocket, I found a sealed envelope from Kepler Feed and Supply. Across the front, Dad had written 3 shaky lines. Vanessa met Rusk. South 80. Do not sign. Then I heard Vanessa lock the mudroom door behind me. Vanessa stood outside the mudroom and asked why I needed Dad's jacket. I slid the envelope inside my purse before answering. He was cold. She unlocked the door but searched my face instead of the room. As I passed, she gripped my arm and said, "Stop confusing him, Laurel. The court will hear about every reckless thing you do." From my car, I called Kepler Feed and Supply. Tamsin Kepler, the owner, recognized my name immediately. When I mentioned the envelope, her voice became guarded. She said Dad had visited 2 weeks earlier and left instructions involving me. She could not discuss them by phone. Then she added, "Bring him here only when he's completely clear." That evening, Vanessa emailed me a healthcare directive and claimed it gave her complete authority over Dad. I sent it to an elder law attorney through my company's legal plan. His answer arrived within an hour. Vanessa could assist with medical decisions only if 2 physicians declared Dad incapable. No such declarations existed. She had been using a limited document like absolute control. I returned to the farm before sunrise, while Vanessa was still asleep. Dad was already in the machine shed checking a tractor battery. He knew the date, my job, and the amount offered for the lease. When I explained the clinic, he listened carefully. "Take me now," he said, "before she gives me those things and tells everyone I agreed." At the Des Moines clinic, a geriatric pharmacist compared every prescription bottle with Dad's medical chart. The pale capsules appeared nowhere. They had no pharmacy label, dosage, or prescribing physician. Dad said Vanessa began giving them to him shortly after he rejected the development offer. The clinic recommended observation without the capsules and documented his consent on video. If you were in my position, would you confront Vanessa immediately or stay quiet until you understood the entire plan? Share your answer and subscribe to Before She Spoke Stories. Vanessa arrived 3 hours later, accusing me of kidnapping a vulnerable man. She brought a letter from Dad's family doctor describing probable progressive dementia. The clinic physician noticed the letter was based entirely on symptoms Vanessa had reported by phone. Dad had never received neurological testing. Vanessa demanded his release, but Dad looked at her and said clearly, "I'm staying." After 24 hours without the capsules, Dad remembered the missing ledger. Vanessa had placed papers in front of him and called them tax documents. When he refused to sign, she became angry and took his notebook from above the refrigerator. He also remembered hearing her tell someone named Rusk, "Once the hearing is finished, the South Field won't be a problem." The clinic sent the broken capsule and Dad's blood sample for analysis. The preliminary result showed a sedating antihistamine at a level capable of worsening confusion in older adults. It was not proof Vanessa intended harm, but it contradicted her claim that the capsules were harmless vitamins. The physician warned us not to speculate publicly until the full toxicology report returned. On the 3rd morning, Dad walked into Kepler Feed and Supply without assistance. Tamsin locked the front door and led us into her office. She had security images showing Vanessa meeting developer Grant Rusk beside the loading dock. Dad had seen them together and asked Tamsin to preserve the footage. He had also left her copies of papers Vanessa never knew he found. Inside the sealed envelope was an advisory agreement between Vanessa and Rusk's development company. She would receive $185,000 if she secured authority to advance the sale of Dad's southern 80 acres. The payment depended on obtaining that authority before the company's option expired. Dad read the final date twice. It was the day after the guardianship hearing. Then he said, "Vanessa cannot learn, I remember." By the 3rd day without Vanessa's capsules, Dad remembered every person in the room. He completed a cognitive evaluation, explained the farm lease, and repeated Grant Rusk's offer accurately. The clinic documented the improvement but warned that one clear assessment might not defeat weeks of alarming reports. Dad asked us to keep his recovery confidential until the hearing. Vanessa amended her petition before we could respond. She accused me of removing Dad against medical advice and withholding treatment to manipulate his testimony. Her evidence included a kitchen video of Dad calling me by our mother's name. The recording began after she gave him the capsules. That part was missing. To the court, it still looked painfully convincing. Our attorney, Blythe Mercer, requested an immediate capacity review. Vanessa's lawyer argued that every delay placed Dad and the farm at risk. The judge froze all property transactions until the hearing and named Vanessa temporary manager of Dad's household expenses. She could not sell the land yet, but she regained access to his home, mail, and financial records. Dad made the decision I feared most. He returned to the farmhouse under a court-approved home care schedule. She needs to believe her plan is working, he told me. He promised not to swallow anything Vanessa handed him. Still, I watched him climb into her car pretending to forget where he had been, and every protective instinct in me screamed to stop him. The court assigned Mira Sloan, a professional visitor, to observe Dad at home. Vanessa welcomed her with medication charts, prepared meals, and stories about my supposed interference. But Mira noticed something Vanessa missed. Dad answered questions clearly when they were alone. The moment Vanessa entered the room, he became quiet, hesitant, and strangely dependent. The final capsule report confirmed a sedating antihistamine, but it could be purchased legally without a prescription. The laboratory could not prove who filled the capsule or when Dad received it. Vanessa called the result meaningless and suggested I had contaminated the sample. Our strongest physical evidence had become another argument instead of the answer I needed. Vanessa began telling neighbors that I wanted to force Dad off his land and collect my inheritance early. Her story moved through church groups and farming circles faster than any correction could. The young couple planning to lease the farm withdrew their offer, saying they could not risk entering a family dispute. Dad's original plan was collapsing before the hearing even began. At the review conference, the judge continued Vanessa's temporary authority until the full hearing. She walked out smiling beside Grant Rusk. That afternoon, survey stakes appeared along the southern 80 acres. A sale was still legally frozen, but Rusk's company had begun environmental testing under an agreement Vanessa claimed Dad signed months earlier. Mira called me from her car after a second home visit. Vanessa's medication chart listed the capsules as physician-approved supplements, but no doctor had signed the page. Mira also saw Vanessa remove a red lockbox from Dad's desk before their interview. "She is curating what I'm allowed to see," Mira said. "Find out what was inside that box." Tamsin met us after closing and opened the feed store's safe. Months earlier, Dad had scanned every page of his black farm ledger and signed a dated statement in front of 2 witnesses. He had recorded each capsule, every memory lapse, and every meeting between Vanessa and Rusk. The final entry contained one instruction: let Vanessa testify first, then bring me in wearing my farm jacket. Dad remained at the farmhouse and let Vanessa believe his confusion had returned. He asked the same question twice when she entered, misplaced his glasses where she could find them, and pretended not to recognize Grant Rusk during a visit. But each night, he called Blythe from the machine shed and reported every conversation he had heard. Mira's description helped Dad identify the red lockbox. Vanessa had taken it from his desk after discovering he kept old land documents inside. Dad remembered the spare key hidden beneath a loose workbench drawer. When Vanessa left for court preparation, Mira legally observed Dad open it. Inside were copies of the development option and Vanessa's handwritten payment schedule. The option agreement contained Dad's initials on every page except the final signature sheet. That page carried a signature he denied writing. Blythe warned us not to accuse Vanessa of forgery without an expert. She obtained Dad's banking, tax, and lease signatures for comparison, then hired a document examiner who agreed to prioritize the review before the hearing. Grant Rusk sent Vanessa an email demanding proof of authority by noon after the hearing. If she failed, the company would withdraw and reclaim its advance expenses from her personally. Dad's duplicated ledger showed she had already accepted $20,000 labeled as consulting fees. Vanessa was not merely chasing profit anymore, she was trying to escape a debt. I contacted the young farmers who had withdrawn from Dad's lease. Instead of pressuring them, I showed them the court order freezing the property and explained that Dad still wanted their proposal considered. They agreed to provide their original emails. Those messages proved Dad had negotiated detailed lease terms before Vanessa began describing him as incapable of business decisions. Blythe submitted the neutral clinic evaluation, toxicology report, and Mira's observations under seal. She deliberately withheld the duplicate ledger and the advisory agreement. Vanessa's attorney received enough evidence to know we were challenging her story, but not enough to understand how. Dad said, "Let her prepare for the argument she thinks we're making." The document examiner finished the comparison the night before the hearing. Dad's initials throughout the option agreement appeared genuine, likely taken from pages he understood. The final signature did not. Its pressure, letter formation, and spacing were inconsistent with decades of verified samples. Someone had attached Dad's consent to terms he had never approved. Before sunrise, I met Dad at Tamsin's store. He put on the faded green jacket and slid the original feed store envelope into the chest pocket. Blythe had arranged for him to wait in a private room near the courtroom until she sent for him. Vanessa believed he was at home with an aide, too disoriented to attend. Vanessa testified calmly. She described forgotten meals, wandering, unpaid bills, and dangerous decisions. Some incidents were real, but everyone followed the capsules. When Blythe asked whether Dad understood the development agreement, Vanessa lowered her eyes and said, "He barely understands that he owns a farm." Grant Rusk watched from the back row without moving. Blythe placed the unsigned clinic report aside and asked Vanessa one final question. "Does your father recognize either daughter today?" Vanessa glanced at me, then faced the judge. "No," she said. "He doesn't know who Laurel is, and he doesn't understand why we're here." Blythe nodded toward the courtroom door. The handle began to turn. Dad walked into the courtroom wearing his faded green farm jacket. He did not hesitate or look confused. He pointed first at me. "That is my daughter Laurel." Then he faced Vanessa. "And that is the daughter who kept giving me pills after I told her to stop." Vanessa whispered his name, but Dad answered, "I remember yours perfectly." Blythe asked Dad whether he understood the hearing. He explained that Vanessa wanted authority over his medical care, bank accounts, and farm. Then he stated the acreage, the lease proposal, and Rusk's development deadline from memory. Vanessa's attorney objected that one clear morning proved nothing. Dad reached inside his jacket and removed the feed store envelope. Tamsin testified that Dad had documented his symptoms before Laurel ever contacted the clinic. The duplicate ledger listed each capsule, the time Vanessa gave it to him, and the confusion that followed. 2 feed store employees had witnessed Dad scan and sign the pages. Vanessa could attack my motives, but she could not claim I had created his record. Blythe placed Vanessa's advisory agreement on the evidence screen. Her compensation depended on obtaining control before Rusk's option expired. Vanessa claimed it was only a draft. Then Blythe displayed the $20,000 consulting payment already deposited into Vanessa's account. Grant Rusk stood and tried to leave. The judge ordered him to remain available for questioning. The document examiner explained that Dad's initials were genuine, but the final signature was not. Vanessa had used pages he reviewed to make the agreement appear authorized. Mira then described the red lockbox and the unsigned medication chart. Piece by piece, Vanessa's story stopped looking like concern and started looking like a plan built around keeping Dad impaired. Vanessa finally admitted she had arranged the development deal, but insisted she was saving the farm from Dad's stubbornness. "Laurel left," she said. "I stayed. I deserve security." Dad looked at her for a long moment. "Care is not ownership," he said. "And staying beside someone does not give you permission to make them smaller." The judge denied Vanessa's guardianship petition and terminated her temporary authority immediately. The development option was declared unenforceable pending further review. Dad's accounts were placed under a neutral financial monitor for 90 days, at his request, while every transaction was examined. The suspected forged signature and undisclosed payments were referred to county investigators. Rusk's company withdrew from the project and demanded repayment of Vanessa's advance. Dad barred her from managing his medication or entering the farmhouse without permission. He did not celebrate when she left the courtroom alone. Neither did I. Revenge felt satisfying in theory. In reality, it looked like my sister finally understanding that Dad's vulnerability had never been her opportunity. Did Dad and I make the right decision by exposing everything instead of protecting Vanessa from the consequences? Tell me in the comments and subscribe to Before She Spoke Stories for more stories about women who choose truth over silence. Investigators later asked Dad whether he wanted Vanessa prosecuted to the fullest extent possible. He gave them the evidence and refused to soften the truth, but he would not demand punishment beyond the law. "I won't protect her from consequences," he told me, "but I also won't become cruel just because she was willing to." That spring, Dad signed the 5-year lease with the young farming couple. He also created a land preservation trust so neither daughter could sell the farm alone. Vanessa was not erased from his will, but she would never control him again. On signing day, Dad handed me his green jacket and said, "Keep this where nobody can hide it." I did, because silence had nearly cost him his land, but his own voice brought him home.